Okay, good evening, dear listeners, and welcome to Torah for Non-Jews. Today is part two of our 4-week series titled The 6 Days of Creation, Lessons on How to Live a Better Life or a More Joyous Life. Now, before I begin, please, if you have any questions during this class, which we will answer at the end at the Q&A, please ask your questions at askme@Torah questions. That's TORAH questions.com. So first thing I want to do is finish up from last week's class. In the last week's class that we had 2 weeks ago, we spoke about the 6 days of creation. We went through the introduction to it and the day one of creation. Just want to finish one quick point. In day one, God tells us that he created light. And then it says God separated between the light and the darkness. Why does the Torah, why does the Bible have to tell us this? In other words, what is God telling us? God is really telling us, look, when I'm going to create man, as we're going to learn in the 6th day of creation, I'm going to create man in my image. That means, in many ways, you're going to have to behave like me. I'm giving you direction in life. Let me remind us, myself, you, that the reason why God shared with us the play-by-play of what he did and how he did it is not because he had to share it with us. It's not like we're going to be able to replicate it. It's not like we'll be able to do this. It's because he wants to tell us how to use the world. It's an instruction manual. He wants to tell us how we're going to live life. So here he tells us, you have to separate between light and darkness. The world has light. The world has darkness. The world has good. The world has bad. God leaves it up to us with our free choice to make the distinctions, to make the separations, sometimes even to put up the barriers that we need in order to separate and to keep them totally apart. Give you an example. Say, how do you separate between light and darkness? In other words, when it's inherently dark, bad things, you don't need God to tell you that. But here's, for example, you're making a party for children. That party could have a lot of nice things. It's a good thing inherently. It's light. However, sometimes in a desire to make the party fun, to make it exciting, to bring good things for the kids, we may put up characters that are not so light, that are not so bright, that are not so positive, that are not so good. We need to be careful with that. Sometimes, somebody wants to have an intention, to make it exciting for the kids, and they're going to portray or make a play, act out pirates. Think about it. What is the message? What is the real subconscious message that it's sending to the children? It's sending to the children a subconscious message, which many don't realize, that pirates, which is really stealing and killing, taking what's not yours, taking away from someone else something that doesn't belong to you, belongs to him, belongs to her, and doing what with that? Glorifying it, making it exciting. The kids getting dressed up as pirates. That is not a good idea. That is not something to be celebrated. And that's what God tells us. You need to use your distinction to separate between light and darkness. Sometimes it's only a little dark, but that can lead to great darkness. The message you tell a kid. I even know for myself, for example, growing up as a child, never ever were we allowed to have a gun. Now, I'm not going into the topic, is it good or not good? I personally do believe it's good to be able to defend yourself, and I believe that that's God wants for ourselves. But not as a sport, not as a toy. A child doesn't have a gun. It was even taboo to have water guns. I'm not saying we never did, but we knew that it's not approved. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's something we had to, we had to kind of sneak. Because a gun inherently is a tool of destruction. It's dark. It's not something you play with. It's not something that's exciting. So here's an example from day one where you separate between light and darkness. And this can, have many, many examples in life where even though we're, well-intended and we have all the good ideas, we want to just bring fun and excitement, but we end up sometimes, without even realizing, incorporating things that subconsciously send that very strong message of, this is okay, this is something to be glorified. Sometimes you have people, and perhaps we're all guilty of it. We want to express ourselves, and we drop, what do they call it? The F-bomb. We drop a word that maybe is not appropriate, and we wouldn't say it in normal times. That's not right. There is another element of darkness that one needs to learn to separate. So that's a beautiful example from day one. Another thing that stands out, and this actually stands out throughout the course of creation. If you recall and look inside the verses, you will remember that every single day, how does God finish off the day? And it was evening, it was night, and then it was morning, it was day. And then it was Yom Echad, day one, again, it was night, it was day two. Why tell us that? In other words, what is really God telling us with that? You know what God's telling us? After he already told us to separate between light and darkness, night is a time when it's difficult to get things done. Even a good driver. You drive, it's easier to drive by day. At night, it's already challenging. At night already, you need to put on headlights. Night represents somewhat of an obstacle, somewhat of a challenge. And you know what God's teaching us? In life, in the world that we live in, we cannot expect everything to go easy and pleasant all the time. It doesn't mean life's going to be bad, but God wants us to stand up to the challenge. God wants us to work. God wants us to, quote unquote, put in the effort. The adage, no pain, no gain. Pain doesn't necessarily mean that it has to hurt, in the sense like when somebody, God forbid, abuses you or injures you. No, that's not what pain means. But there's pain. Ask anybody who's a bodybuilder. Ask anybody who's built a business. There's pain involved. There's sacrifice involved. And God, so to speak, is telling us, listen to me. Even for me, so to speak, there was first evening, there was first night, and then there was day, there was light. Don't expect the results. Don't expect to achieve things without putting in the effort. Anybody who succeeded in life went to school. Anybody who, got any degree, who has any promising career, worked hard. They put in an effort. They made, sometimes sleepless hours or nights to study for that test, to push along, to really make it happen. It's not going to come easy. Not going to come easy, but that's okay. God says, so to speak, that happened to me too. So with that, for right now, we complete day number one. Now let's go to day number two. What did God do in day number two? And day number two has two wonderful lessons in life. Again, reminding ourselves, what are the 6 days of creation about? God's not giving us an accounting. God's not telling us what to do or how to do it, but rather he's telling us what to do with it, what to do with this world that he created, how to live it. Here are the instruction manuals. I made the world, says God, and I'm going to tell you things, some secrets that could help you navigate this beautiful world, navigate this beautiful map. So God, what he did was he separated between the waters. Remember, the entire universe was full of water. And therefore, there was no dry land. Nothing can grow. Nothing can happen. But guess what happened? God splits the waters. He wraps up the day, a successful day. But something interesting. In day number one, when God completes the day, he looks back at his work, and what does he say? It says, and God saw that all that he did was kitov. It was good, for it is good. But interestingly, very curious then, the second day, he does not say kitov. He doesn't say, for it was good. Why not? What is the message here? Well, the message here is interesting. Very powerful message. You see, In life, it's not always just about, being nice, being pleasant, being soft. There are times in life, when you have to be a little harsh, or I don't want to say harsh, rigid. You have to step up. You have to take a stance. You have to sometimes even make a division, so to speak, like God did. He had to take a stance and use what we call the power of severity and split the two for a better good, for a purpose that is absolutely necessary and worthwhile. But at the same time, whenever you have to employ, whenever you have to implement some harshness, some separation, some division, it's not something to celebrate. You don't look back at it and go, oh, that was good. A good example that comes to mind, I remember hearing stories, legends of those good parents, those righteous people, that even at the time when they had to punish their child, reprimand the child, maybe give him a little slap of the hand, but that child heard the parent in the next room crying, that he or she had to hand down severity. That is an element of, I had to split. For whatever reason, God found it necessary that I have to do this. But at the same time, I am not going to celebrate it. It's not something you look back and you rub your hands with satisfaction and go, this is good. It had to be done, but it's not good. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, God takes another step and tells us what he called this separation. It says God called the rakia. The rakia is the spread, the top waters which congealed, which we all know as the heavens. And God called this spread, this rakia, he called it shamayim, which is Hebrew for heavens. Why? Because the word rakia, the Hebrew word rakia, which means the spread, the congealment of the water, it also comes from the root word, which means to make a roka, to make a separation, a division. Although this was some kind of separation, but God doesn't want to give it a negative connotation. Call it with something positive. He called it shamayim. He gave it a positive name. Shamayim actually in Hebrew can be broken down in two words, as the Talmudical sages tell us. And it can actually spell out the two words, sham mayim, there is water. That's very positive. Versus rakia, separation, division. Again, try to call it something positive, not to spin it. God is not teaching us to lie. But in the same thing, find a positive. Don't celebrate the negative, even if when you have to do it. Anybody who had surgery is happy to have that surgery because they know it's going to go good for them, correct? Mm. Obviously. Otherwise, why would you go under a knife? It's going to improve your health. Some people, even their appearance, they elect to have surgery. But you're not excited. You don't celebrate. You don't make a party that you're having surgery. It's a necessary thing. You're happy, right? But you also call it with a positive name. You call it a surgery, an operation, a procedure. You don't call it cutting open the body or something like that. That's very negative. Mm-hmm. So always in life, try not to celebrate the negative even when it's necessary, and to try to look at the positive that's in there and give it that positive image as much as possible. Another thing. We said God didn't say kitov. The next day he will. The next day he will. You see, there's also another message here. It's a very interesting message. God just split the waters. For whatever reason, the job wasn't fully done. Why was the job not fully done? Because when we look at the next day, the third day of creation, what do we find? That God separated now the waters from the dry land. And only then can things begin to grow. And only then can things begin to happen. Think about it this way. Many people, if they can't get something done on the same day, you can't get it done right away, immediately, almost immediately, a certain sense of despair sets in, a certain sense of hopelessness, a certain sense of, oh, I failed. I didn't give up. I mean, I didn't make it. Let's give up. And this is a message from God. Even God himself, so to speak, says, you know what? I didn't finish the job. I can't look at the job and say, well done, ki tov, for it is good. Even I have to, so to speak, retire for the night, have some patience, come tomorrow, and we'll start again, or we'll continue the job. We'll get it done. Now, this is in no way an encouragement for procrastination. Okay? In no way. God did not procrastinate. But for whatever reason, this circumstance, we may not know the reason why in God's case this was so, but in our lives sometimes reasons come up that this particular project or this particular effort, this particular job that I need to get done, for whatever reason, could not get done today as best as I tried. I gave it my best. When I go to sleep, do I go to sleep with a sense of despair? Or do I go to sleep with a sense of, I accomplished what I can accomplish today, and tomorrow I will continue. I will not give up. Sometimes, or perhaps most times, it's beyond our comprehension, beyond the capacity of our understanding to know why the circumstances were such that I could not get it done today. But tomorrow I go right back at it. You know, what comes to mind, and I invite you to look it up, a very fascinating story. Anybody who buys bread today, you buy a loaf of bread, what does it look like? Sliced bread. Look up, because we don't have the time to go into the details of the story, but look up the inventor and the invention of the first sliced bread machine. That poor guy was at it for years. And finally, when he had his first prototype, his whole shop went up in flames. Did he give up? Well, if he would have given up, we wouldn't have sliced bread until maybe the very modern technology age that we're in right now, when you can just make any machine in a 3D machine, a 3D printer. He didn't give up. He was right back at it. And even after he finished the second prototype, he couldn't find anyone to buy it. Look up the story. It's a fascinating story. But it's a story of courage. It's a story of diligence. It's a story of not falling into despair because today I couldn't get the job done. When I'm sure about it, when I know it's the right thing that I'm doing, I'm building a career, I'm trying to cultivate a customer. No, you're not going to make a sale on the first meeting. And if you think you are, something may not be right with that sale. Right? Look at all the big major corporations. They got a lot of patience. Before you meet their salesperson, like before you call, I don't know, Comcast to hook up your Wi-Fi, you've seen billboards, you've heard advertisements, correct? You've found their name in your awareness so many times until you finally get there. You don't give up, you invest. And that's what God's telling us. God's telling us, in my world, you need to not despair. You cannot feel like you're a failure if you didn't immediately succeed the first time. Unless, of course, you were lazy and you didn't do enough. But if you did all you can, don't allow yourself to get into a down. Just continue forging ahead. And you will succeed at the end. It's a very beautiful thing. And from there, I will now segue to the third day. Because really the second day and the third day are connected. What happens on the third day? God makes the dry land appear. And immediately what does he do? He commands the land to do what? To start to sprout out all kinds of vegetation. All kinds of vegetation should come out. Interesting. On the first day, God only did one action. So it says, he made the light. And then he just separated the light and the darkness. But it's really one creation. On the second day was just one act of creation. But on the third day, interesting already, he said he goes to two acts of creation. First, he creates the dry land. And immediately, he has all the trees and plants and flowers and fruits and everything and grass, all kinds of terrain all sprout up. Why the rush? What's the message? Here's the message. A person has to always be productive. You have to always look for that opportunity. As soon as you see that opportunity to be productive, to produce, you have to seize it. Even though we just learned, don't give up. But that's only after you've given it your best. Be productive. Yesterday, meaning on Monday, we only split the waters. For whatever reason it had to be that way, it was incomplete. There wasn't any dry land. There wasn't anywhere to make the vegetation sprout from. But as soon as there is somewhere to make the vegetation sprout from, you don't go and say, well, I did enough already today. I did something. Now I can go to sleep. Now I can go watch my favorite show. No. As soon as the opportunity made itself available, as soon as now there is terrain from where God can grow the vegetation, immediately, let's make it happen. Immediately, you have to take advantage of it and make it grow. And that's a very powerful thing. Continuing with that, if you look closely to the verbiage in the verses in the Bible, the Torah, it says something very interesting. It keeps on mentioning the plants and the trees that bear fruit. Rings a bell? The trees that bear fruit. Question is, it only mentions trees that bear fruit. You and I know, anybody knows, that there is a plenitude of trees, perhaps more than fruit trees, that do not bear fruit. More trees don't bear fruit than those that bear fruit. And in fact, all the construction comes from all these big, strong, powerful trees. Some of them maybe have like a little sap or a little something, but most of them, no, their only purpose is that they're just trees that are barren. They have no fruits. Why doesn't God mention them? Were they not created on the third day? Or were they? It was interesting commentary that gives us insight on this and explains that indeed this hint in the verse about the trees that bear fruit was actually the case. Every single tree in the universe at the time, meaning every kind of tree, every species, had some kind of fruit that it bore. Can you imagine how many fruits there would have been today had we still have that? However, when man sinned, what happened? God said that you will be the curse, you will be cursed, and the earth will be cursed because of you. When that happened, that power to produce fruits was removed from most of all the species of trees. They lost that power. That was the curse. So imagine the amount of fruits that we have today, all kinds of fruits and the exotic fruits and everything. That's not even the ultimate blessing. But what does this teach us? Because it's obvious that the Torah makes it a point to signal this to us, to hint this to us. That means we should be aware of it. That what? All trees had fruit. And this brings us to, hey, not all trees have fruit. And this brings us to this insight, to the commentary, that indeed at that time, immediately upon their creation, all trees had fruit. Only on the sixth day when man sinned, did it get lost. Did they lose that ability because of the curse, because of the punishment? But what does this teach us? What was the sin? If you think about it, all trees in the world had fruit. There was no shortage of species, of taste, of flavors, of kinds of fruit, textures, anything you wanted. And what was the sin of man? He wasn't happy with what he had. That one fruit that he's not to eat, that's what he wanted. That one fruit, that's what he yearned for. He couldn't hold himself in. What does this tell us in life? What he did have wasn't sufficient for him. He wasn't happy. He yearned for something he didn't have, or he wasn't allowed to have. And therefore he lost from what he did have. And this is teaching us how man, as ambitious as you should be, and I'll go into it in a moment, But at the same time, you have to be content with what you have. You have to be happy with what's there. Because if you're not going to be happy, you're not going to be content with what you do have, you know what's going to happen? You may lose it. You may lose what you have already. Now, the question then is, so is it okay to be ambitious? Or what we call the pursuit of the American dream? Is it okay to want to have more? So here, I'll quote from the Talmud. The same Talmud, which is the wisdom of life, teaches us that what is the inherent characteristic of a true business person. In other words, somebody who's engaged in commerce, somebody who's out there, somebody who's ambitious. And that's what every human being should be. God made us to be ambitious. Mm-hmm. The Talmud describes it this way, and it says, quote, one who has 100 immediately desires 200. And then when you make that second 100, you now desire 400, not another 100, but 400. In other words, you realize your abilities, you realize your potential, and now you have ambition for more. That's one statement. But another statement in the Talmud, the same teachings, the same wisdom of the Torah, tells us, what is the true rich man? Who is the true rich person? One who is happy with their lot. So which is true? Should I be ambitious? Should I be a business person? Should I be eager to make more, to do better? Is it okay to want more? I'm driving a cheap car. Is it okay to want to have a better car? Mm-hmm. Or do I have to just be happy with what I have and never have ambition for more? And the world would have never evolved and never developed. There would have been no invention as we know it. The answer is, at the same time that you're ambitious, which is not only okay, but it's encouraged, one has to also know to be happy with what they do have. In other words, you have to enjoy what you have. Ambition doesn't come at the cost of happiness. So in other words, if one is driving their little cheap car, I'm just using that as a common example, and they're bitter a whole time, and they lack any happiness, and they don't realize, hey, there's people who don't have cars. And there was a time I didn't have a car. This gets me from point A to point B, and if I live in Miami, it even has AC. And I can even turn the radio on and hear what's going on in the world. That's nice. At the same time, it's very good to say, if I work harder, and if I'm blessed with God's blessings, I'm going to do more. And one day when I could afford it, I'll buy a better car. That's beautiful. In fact, that's what God's teaching us. Be ambitious. Try for more. Go for it. Be a go-getter, but not at the cost of being happy. Not at the cost of enjoying what you have already. And this is why on the second day, how does God conclude the day? When you look at both actions of God, what does he say? Twice he says, Ki tov, for it is good. Both times, in both actions, it says God saw what he did and it was good. In fact, in the Jewish tradition, we know that this Tuesday is a very, very blessed day because God said twice, Ki tov. Of course, he said once, almost you can say to compensate for the day before, which he didn't say it at all because it wasn't complete, if you recall, and it wasn't the utmost positive. But still, when was the double good said? On this day. But think of it, because this day is the first day of productivity. Things are growing. This life is beginning to happen. So it's true that as much as we learned not to give up, not to fall into despair when things are not exactly the way you want it to go, but still at the same time, when do you begin to celebrate? When there's something productive happening. When it starts to produce. When you start to see results, now you can celebrate. And that's a very, very important lesson. And quickly, we'll go over to the fourth day. We'll touch upon some of the fourth day. What happened? What did God create on the fourth day? It says he created the two luminaries, the two great lights, the sun and the moon. And the way it appears in the verse, God calls them the two great lights. Nothing is ambiguous in the Torah. And if it says the two great lights, what does that tell us? That they were both equally two great lights. In fact, the Midrash, Jewish tradition, tells us a very interesting anecdote about this. The sun and the moon were equal in size, equal in power. I know it's hard to imagine. All the scientists will jump on it because the scientists know what they know after the fact, what we have. They don't know what happened before. But originally, the way God made it was the sun and the moon were both the same size. Here's what happened. The moon came to God to complain and said, why do you need two equally sized luminaries? Why the two of us? Why two great things? God said, you make a good point. There should be one big one and one small one. There should be a hierarchy. You're going to be the small one because you complained. Mm-hmm. And God shrunk the moon. Not only did he shrink the moon, but he made it dependent on the sun. Mm-hmm. First, it had its own light, and now it's dependent on the sun. And this teaches us a very lesson, and I'm going to share a beautiful anecdote, beautiful story that really can highlight this lesson that we learned from here, amongst the many lessons. In the Chabad dynasty, the fourth Chabad Rebbe, the fourth Chabad leader, his two oldest sons, the second of which, not his oldest, became later his successor. When they were little children, they were once playing, very smart, gifted children. And the older one was like about 3 or 4 years older than his brother, happened to be shorter than his brother. So as they were playing, kids sometimes, they dig in the sand, made a little hole, and he said to his brother, his younger brother, stand in the hole. And when he stood in the hole, he said, look, now we're the same height. Or perhaps he said, maybe I'm a little taller than you. Father, who himself was this great scholar, great leader, great rabbi, he did what a good parent has to do. He was observing his children. And he called them in. And he said, my dear children, I want you to really learn and absorb the following lesson. It's okay in life if you want to be elevated, if you want to be taller, if you want to be higher, if you want to be greater. But you can never do it by putting someone else down, by complaining about someone else's greatness. You want to be taller? Take some sand. Instead of digging a hole and putting that person in the hole, take some sand and make a mound. You stand on a mound. You elevate yourself, but not put someone else down. And that's an important lesson. And that's what God was saying to the moon. You want to be bigger? Make yourself bigger. Become bigger. But if you're going to complain about someone else being big, in other words, in a sense, putting them down, it may look like you're bigger, but you're really not bigger. You're smaller. In fact, in God's world, everything is true. Everything is real. So if you're really smaller, I'm going to make you look smaller because that's who you really are now, by virtue of your actions, of what you did. So this just sums up our class for tonight. And I'm just going to thank all the listeners. Thanks a lot for joining us in tonight's class. Remember to visit us at www.bnacademy. That stands for B'nai Noach Academy.org. And if you have any questions or comments, please email us at askme@torahquestions.com. Much success and blessings, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. It's 34 minutes. Okay. End, right?